right, we are in Genesis 44 and 45 this morning. I was thinking about the late 1970s yesterday, in particularly because I had to put gas in my car. And this is a blessing, right, to get gas these days? It's a spiritual test at this point for me to see how my heart is. Well, if you're old like me, you remember the late 70s. Anybody remember the inflation of the late 70s? All right, so, dollars wise, it wasn't the same, but gas became ridiculously expensive and there was a shortage of gas. And we didn't have electric cars back then. And so what all of the car companies did is they made looking back, probably not the greatest decision, but they decided to make very gas efficient cars that were about as thin as, Matchbox. And they really were horrible vehicles. But, they were little tiny cylinder engines, sometimes as small as 3 cylinders, and just little tiny frames. And they were selling these things like crazy. Well, my older brother bought a late 70s banana yellow Ford Pinto. They called it the Ford Pinto. It was the one famous that if you hit in the back, it explodes. And he came rolling into the house with this banana yellow Ford. I thought it was the coolest thing. And I had just gotten my driver's license. And so I thought, I need to drive this. I need to go show my friends this cool car. And I pleaded with my brother, said, please take it out tonight. And he was like, no, you can't take my new car out. He goes, you just got your driver's license. But I wore him out. And he says, okay, look, you have to be very careful. It's a brand new car. I said, I promise to do so. And long story short, sometime late that night, the new banana yellow Ford Pinto was in a ditch on top of a sofa. Literally. And fortunately, the cars were so cheaply made that I called some buddies and we were able to lift the car up and take it to the road and set it down. But it was about a week or so later, and my brother said, man, there's something sounds wrong at the bottom of my car, which I was silent for a few days. And then I finally confessed what I had done, and I confessed my sin to him, and I thought, well, he's going to kill me now. And he forgave me. And yeah, I felt such this debt, like I got to at least help pay for this. I didn't have any money. And I told him that, and he said, I know. He goes, I'll pay for it. And what I learned and what I experienced was what we call redemption. Redemption. Redemption is when someone pays your debt for you. And it just really led me to question, how much do we focus on this important aspect of our salvation, which is the redeeming grace of God? Well, let me ask you this. Do you tend to focus more on the sins against you or those that sin against you, as opposed to the fact that you've been forgiven by so much? And if your focus is more on the sins against you than the forgiveness that you have received from God, then you really don't understand or appreciate what redemption is. Friends, I want to show you from Genesis 44 and 45 today how the redeeming grace of God frees us from our sin debt. And at the same time, it clothes us with the righteousness of God. Let's look at the story where Joseph finally confesses to his brothers who he is. Chapter 44 and 1. Joseph commanded his steward, fill the men's bags with as much food as they can carry, and put each one's silver on top of the bag, and put my cup, the silver one, at the top of the youngest one's bag, along with the silver for his grain. And so the steward did just as Joseph had told. All right, so catching up if you're visiting today, which, by the way, grateful to have you here at Open Door. Joseph is sold into slavery, and 20 years later, so many things happen. He becomes really the steward or the governor over all of Egypt, which was the greatest empire in the world at that time, second only to Pharaoh. And through God's providence, he went through this journey of suffering to sovereignty. And then because of a drought that he had dreamed, his brothers were told by Jacob to go to Egypt and to try to buy some grain. And they show up in Egypt, and Joseph recognizes them. All right, and so then there's this dramatic story of Joseph. What does he do? He doesn't punish them. Matter of fact, his desire is reconciliation with them. And as we're going to see, he even has a desire for their redemption and their forgiveness. And so but he's not sure whether or not they have changed at all. And so he sort of puts them to a test. Now, the test is to go and see if Benjamin is still alive and bring Benjamin to him. He wanted to lay eyes on him. And so Joseph, the brothers don't know who he is. And so he says to his steward, all right, here's what we're going to do. And this is actually the second time where they've tried to purchase grain from Joseph, and he's given the money back. And so he says, here's what we're going to do again. Put all the silver back in their bag, but take my very special silver cup and put it in Benjamin's bag and then let them go. And then we're going to go, I'm going to have you go and go after them and confront them. You know, the irony of the silver that was used to sell Joseph, for 20 pieces of silver. And Joseph keeps giving the silver back to their brothers along with this special cup. And, at morning light, it says, the men were sent off with their donkeys, and they had not gone very far from the city when Joseph says to his steward, now get up and pursue the men, and when you overtake them, say this to them, why have you repaid evil with good? Keep that thought in mind. And then say, isn't this the cup that my master drinks from and uses for divination? Why have you done wrong? So it's all a ploy. And the steward is going to follow along with what Joseph has tasked him to do. The cup, don't think of it as having any magical powers. He's just using it as a part of the ploy to get the brothers' attention. But it is interesting when Moses writes this, when he makes this statement, why have you repaid evil with good? I mean, there's just a common ethic that you don't have to be a Christian to understand that you are to return good for good. Even in the law, there's this sense of what we call lex talionis, where it's an eye for an eye, right? Evil for evil, good for good. But then if you know what Jesus taught us when he explained his kingdom for Christians, right? We even turn that upside down, because what Jesus asks us to do is when evil is done against us, we don't respond with evil. We actually respond with good. Good for evil. That's the Christian ethic. And so Jesus would say things like, you need to turn the other cheek. You need to go the extra mile. He explained to us that this is what characterizes his kingdom. Well, Joseph is going to confront his brothers and saying, so much good has been done to you. Why have you responded with evil? And this is just a little, again, right? A little lesson for them of what they did to him 20 years ago, which Joseph doesn't even know that the brothers have been grieving over this the entire time. Joseph isn't aware. And so, he's going to try to figure out if there's any sense of change or repentance in his brothers by doing this. So, sure enough, in verse 6, when the steward overtook them and he said these words to them, they now are going to respond actually a bit arrogantly, because, they're thinking there's no way. I mean, they had just been through this whole thing where Joseph had put the silver back, and they went and then they realized what had happened. And so they're like, no, there's no way we're going to be fooled again. And so when he overtook him, they said to him, why does my Lord say these things? And so this is now Joseph's brothers, they're saying, your servants could not possibly do such a thing. We even brought back to you from the land of Canaan the silver that we found on top of our bags. That was the first time that happened. How could we steal silver or gold from your master's house? And then they make this pretty bold statement. If it is found with one of us, your servants, he must die, and the rest of us will become my Lord's slaves. Now, there is a bit of a change here, right? Because, again, we're not seeing sort of the self-centeredness of the brothers, and they're not contending against one another. They're even saying things like, we'll all be willing to be slaves if one of our brothers has done this. So the steward then, again, he's following along with the plot that Joseph had hatched. And he says, what you have said is right, but the only one who is found to have it will be my slave, and the rest of you will be blameless. So each one quickly lowers his sack to the ground, and they open it up, and the steward searches, beginning with the oldest and then ending with the youngest. Again, Joseph had set this whole thing up, and so, they've got these huge, bags of grain, and all of a sudden, they open up Reuben's, and there's no silver cup there, and then Simeon and Levi and Judah, and goes all the way down to Issachar, and then the only one left is Benjamin. And by this time, the brothers might have been thinking, see, we haven't done anything wrong. But then, when Benjamin's sack was opened, the cup was found. In verse 13, it says, and they tore their clothes, and each one loaded his donkey and returned back to Egypt. A couple of important things that are happening with this. The first is that when Benjamin's sack was open and the cup was found, was the response of the brothers. Now, it could very well have happened a few years earlier when the brothers were spending more time contending against each other than caring for one another, that when this had happened, that they would have just said to Benjamin, dude, what have you done? And just turned their backs on him and said, okay, he's yours. Take him for what he did. We're going back home. But they didn't do that. There was a sense of solidarity now amongst the brothers. And they weren't angry with Benjamin. They were grieved. And then they tore their clothes, which is interesting. And I just want you to keep that in mind because, Moses is a master storyteller as he's writing these narratives, but he's always putting in these sort of themes. And now one of them is the tearing of the clothes, right? And there's this whole sense where Moses is talking about clothing in these passages. And when the brothers sold Joseph into slavery because they hated the fact that he was wearing some special clothes, and they actually ripped it off of him and bloodied it and took it to his dad and made the lie that he had been killed. Jacob tears his clothes in mourning. And of course, they didn't tear their clothes in mourning. They hated Joseph back then. But now we see the brothers sort of maturing and we see just them changing. And now they're tearing their clothes with a sense of grief and a sense of mourning. I mean, they're not saying like, oh man, of course Benjamin would have done that. I mean, he's just like Joseph back in the day. Selfish, self-centered, the favored one, but they didn't say that. They didn't accuse him. They didn't revile him. They grieved over him, which, by the way, if I can say this, friends, that grief is always a better response to sin than anger. I think there's an appropriate response to sin. And when you're sinned against, right, there should be a reaction. And even if there's a sense of righteous indignation that wells up in you, remember what Paul said in Ephesians around the end of chapter 4. He said, be angry, but do not sin. Right? So there's a sense of you have to be very careful when sinned against, that you don't allow anger to turn into bitterness, to turn into greater sin. I think the appropriate response to sin is grief and brokenness. And the brothers are showing this right now. Let vengeance belong to the Lord. But they're now in solidarity. They're all going to go back to Egypt. They're not just saying, okay, take Benjamin. No, they're going to go with him. Verse 14. Now, Moses writes it this way. He says, when Judah and his brothers reached Joseph's house. Now, why is Moses describing the group as Judah and his brothers? I want you to keep that in mind, because remember, I told you a few weeks back that there are really three principal characters in these latter chapters of Genesis. The one is Joseph, obviously, but the second is Judah. And he plays a very important role, not just then, but in the future of Israel. And then Jacob, because ultimately, remember, I told you, Jacob has got to get to Egypt. In order for God's plan to be fulfilled, we got to get Jacob and the family to Egypt. So keep that in mind. And now you see, but Moses is letting us in on this, because he says when Judah and his brothers reached Joseph's house, Judah has become the leader and the spokesman amongst the group, even though he was the fourth one that was born. So they arrive at Joseph's house. They had just had a glorious meal with Joseph just a few days before. Joseph was still there. And what do? They fulfill the dream of Joseph. And they fall down on the ground before him. And there they are, bowing again, just as Joseph had dreamed. Now, Joseph, he's playing the role. He says, what have you done? He says to them, didn't you know that a man like me could uncover the truth by divination? To which now Judah is going to speak for the brothers. What can we say to my Lord? He replies. How can we plead? How can we justify ourselves? Now look very closely at the next phrase. He doesn't say you have exposed our sin, does he? What does he say? God has exposed your servant's iniquity. What's Judah doing here? Judah is now confessing a 20-year-old sin that he and his brothers had committed. He says God is the one who has revealed this to us. Remember, I've been trying to tell you that when you read these narratives, you can't just read them as human stories with moral application. No, God is at work, and God is the center of this story. And now Judah is telling us that during this crisis, no, it is God who's exposed your servant's sin. He's recalling the sin of the past when they sold Joseph into slavery. Judah is making the appropriate confession. But then he goes on and he says, we are now my Lord's slaves, both we and the one in whose possession the cup was found. But Joseph says, no, I swear that I will not do this. The man who is in possession of the cup was found will be my slave. The rest of you can go in peace to your father. And it is just interesting, that Joseph is now having this conversation with Judah, because Joseph has got to be curious as to what Judah's up to. He remembers when he was thrown into the pit, he was crying out for help, that he overhears Judah saying, let's just sell him. Let's make a profit off of this guy. But now Judah is pleading on behalf of his brother. And in verse 18, Judah then approaches him and says, my Lord, please let your servant speak personally to my Lord. And don't be angry with your servant, for you are like Pharaoh. And so now Judah is making an appeal on behalf of the brothers. And he basically goes back and tells the story of how, when they went back to Canaan, they were told that if they can't return unless they bring Benjamin. And when they got to the point where they were speaking to Jacob and saying, look, we can't go back because he had kept Simeon, if you recall, as a prisoner. He says, if we're going to go and retrieve Simeon, we have to produce Benjamin. And Jacob said, absolutely not. You can't take my favored son. I lost Joseph, still grieving over him. And now you expect me to give you Benjamin. He says, absolutely not. And he tells his sons, and especially Judah, who said, look, I'll be responsible. Jacob says, no, if I lose Benjamin, I'll just die. This will take my gray hairs down to the grave. And what Joseph learns as Judah is basically recalling the story is that his dad, his father, Jacob, still remembers him and still grieves over him. Benjamin is alive. Jacob's alive. And Jacob still remembers Joseph. All of this was so helpful for Joseph. So in verse 30, Judah basically says, look, if I come to your servant, my father, Jacob, and the boy is not with us, speaking of Benjamin, because his life is wrapped up with the boy's life. When he sees that the boy is not with us, he'll die. Then your servants will have brought the gray hairs of your servant, our father, down to Sheol in sorrow. And again, we're seeing the fact that Judah has been changed. Because, back in the day, Judah hated the fact that Jacob favored Joseph because he came from Rachel. And Judah was the fourth son of Leah, who was the unloved wife. And so Judah must be thinking, well, at least he might have thought, well, here's a way for me to, avenge my unloved mother, Leah, and put Rachel down by giving up Benjamin. But he didn't do that. As a matter of fact, Judah at this point has conceded all of that. Judah is actually choosing the love of his father, even though his father unfortunately favored some of the sons above the others. Judah is choosing his love and his loyalty to the father even above himself or his mother. And so then Judah says that your servant, verse 32, became accountable to my father for the boy, saying, if I do not return him to you, I will always bear the guilt for sinning against you, my father. And Judah has changed. And Judah is now beginning to understand what it means to be a sacrificial leader. And Judah has just said, I'm not going to bear the guilt anymore. I've been bearing it for 20 years of what I did to Joseph, and I'm not going to do it again. So verse 33, he says, now please let your servant remain here as my Lord's slave in place of the boy. Let him go back with his brothers. For how can I go back to my father without the boy? I could not bear to see the grief that would overwhelm him. And so now Judah willingly offers himself to become a slave in place of his brother. And this, friends, is just a foreshadowing of what a future child of Judah would do for all of us. Because Judah now is willingly placing himself as a slave, as a substitution for Benjamin. He still doesn't know if Benjamin had actually sinned by stealing the cup or not. Judah is willing to offer his life instead. And Judah now is beginning to become that royal, redeeming figure that will be so absolutely important for Judah's posterity in the future. David, and then, of course, Jesus. And what we're seeing here now is a story of redemption. Redemption. Redemption is such an important aspect of our salvation. Because what redemption means is that a person is purchased, and by way of their purchase, they are given freedom to live. That's what redemption means. And particularly when the Bible talks about redemption, it uses in the reference of a slave being purchased. Now, the slave has no ability to afford their freedom, and so someone has got to pay the ransom price in order for them to be freed. And so this concept of redeeming will become vitally important, both in the Old Testament and the New. God will say later to Moses, because remember, Moses is writing all of this, and so he has to have this thought in his mind, because in much like Joseph, who had become a prince of Egypt, Moses will be a prince of Egypt. And Moses understood what it meant to have a relationship with Pharaoh and all of that. And because what God said to Moses is the children of Israel had been slaves for 400 years. He says to Moses, I'm going to redeem my children from Egypt, because our God is a redeeming God. Much later, we'll see after the time of the judges, there's an Israelite named Boaz from the area of Bethlehem. And he will become a kinsman redeemer by purchasing Ruth, who will be the grandmother or the great-grandmother of David. And then we'll see Jeremiah the prophet, who will be predicting that God is going to redeem his people from a future Messiah. And then all of this then culminates with the person of Jesus Christ. The New Testament loves to use this concept of redemption. And there are two words in particular in the New Testament that speak to it. Again, one is this concept of ransoming someone who's in danger and someone who is enslaved, and they pay the ransom price in order to set that person free. And the other word that's very common in the New Testament for redemption is actually a very simple word that talks about purchasing something from the marketplace. If you visit any of the ancient cities, there's always this place called the Agora. And that's where people would just, set up their goods to sell. And you can buy food and you could buy tents, but, you could also at that time purchase slaves. And so the Apostle Paul uses this concept of going into the marketplace and purchasing a slave, and then letting that slave be set free to live. And then this is the concept of redemption. And so when Paul is describing what Christ did for us on the cross, he loves to use this word redemption, like Ephesians chapter 1. In him, in Christ, we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of our sins, according to the riches of his grace that he richly poured out on us with all wisdom and understanding. Again, in chapter 3, he says, Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us. Our God is a redeeming God, and Christ is a redeeming Savior. So, like Judah, but so much better, Christ willingly goes to the cross, offers himself to the slave market of sin as a substitute, frees us. He pays the penalty of our sins. He becomes a curse instead of us being cursed, and he redeems us. And in here, back in Genesis, Judah is willing to be a type of a kinsman redeemer. Well, chapter 45, after this takes place, after this conversation with Judah, at this point, Joseph is satisfied. He has definitely seen a change in his brothers, especially Judah. He cannot wait any longer to keep this facade going. It says, Moses writes, he could no longer keep his composure in front of all of his attendants. So he calls out, send everyone away from me. No one was with him when he revealed his identity to his brothers, but he was weeping so loudly, it says, that all the Egyptians heard it. Everyone in Pharaoh's household heard it. They didn't know why Joseph was weeping so. But then Joseph says to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? And of course, his brothers were terrified at that point. They didn't know what to take of this. I mean, he at that point didn't look like them. He looked like an Egyptian. And if it was true, they were thinking, oh man, are we in for it now? But that wasn't Joseph's heart. I mean, all along, Joseph, he wanted reconciliation with his brothers. He just needed to test them to make sure their heart was right, and it was. And now Joseph, he just couldn't take it anymore. He wanted to show grace, not punishment, to his brothers. So he says to his brothers, come near me. And they came, and he says, I'm Joseph. I'm your brother. I'm the one you sold into Egypt. And then he says this, and now don't be grieved or angry with yourselves for selling me here, because God sent me ahead of you to preserve your life. Again, the God-centeredness of this story. And Joseph, he now understands that the sovereign plan of God was that he must be sold as a slave so that he could later become the prince of Egypt, not just to redeem Egypt, but ultimately to redeem his family from death by way of starvation. He says, I know God sent me here so that your life may be preserved. Because Joseph understood that the famine has been 2 years and it's devastating, but there's 5 more years to go. So he says, God sent me ahead of you to establish you as a remnant within the land and to keep you alive by great deliverance. Therefore, it wasn't you who sent me, but God. And he's made me a father to Pharaoh, the Lord of entire household and ruler over all of Egypt. I love this because here now Joseph understands that God is working out all things for the good of his family. Joseph gets it. And in this moment, here is this redeeming son and brother who is choosing grace instead of punishment. And it is the greater desire that Joseph heals the broken relationship that he has with his brothers. Which, by the way, friends, God can do that. God can heal any broken relationship that you have with someone. God can do that. He's a redeeming God. And his redeeming grace is there and it's available for us. And I love the fact that Joseph, he chose grace. And now Joseph, now that he's made this revelation, he's like, I've got to see my father. So he says, return quickly to my father and say to them, this is what your son Joseph says. God has made me Lord over all of Egypt. Come down and see me without delay. You can settle in the land of Goshen and be near to me. You and your children and your grandchildren, your flocks and your herds and all that you have, I will sustain you there. Because there's going to be 5 more years of famine. Otherwise, you and your household and everything that you have will become destitute. He says to his brothers, look, he's still trying to convince them it's him. Your eyes and the eyes of my brother Benjamin can see that I'm the one speaking to you. Tell my father about all my glory in Egypt and about everything that you have seen, and bring my father here quickly. And Joseph throws his arms around his brother Benjamin, and they weep. And Benjamin weeps. And then Joseph, as an act of grace, he kisses each of his brothers and he weeps with them. And afterwards, they're now talking as brothers. Joseph, he understood. This is all God's doing. And now we're reunited again by God's grace. And Joseph now becomes the one who offers the covenant promises to Jacob's family once again. Remember God's covenant with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. And what did God promise? People, possessions, and protection and preservation. And they had almost lost that. And Joseph is saying, I'll provide that for you. God is going to fulfill his covenant promises to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and his posterity. And Joseph is going to see to that. And as a result, we just, again, want to see Joseph as this so important figure, and we're so reminded of what Christ has done for us as we read this story. Just like Joseph, Christ's suffering becomes our blessing. And what Joseph basically offers Jacob and his sons is to experience the reversal of the curse. Because if you recall back in Genesis 3, the curse, when Adam and Eve sinned, it cursed the ground, it cursed the land. And because of God's grace and through Joseph, Egypt was sustaining itself. And there was a particular area there called Goshen. And in many ways, it was like Eden. And Joseph is saying, let's return to Eden. Let's reverse the curse of sin and death. And sure enough, in verse 21, because Pharaoh actually, he heard everything that was going on, and he blessed Joseph's plans, and he told them, man, you just take everything you need. Come, I'll give you the best part of Egypt for you to live in. It's a glorious story. Joseph's love and loyalty to Pharaoh won the day. And so the sons did this. Joseph, verse 21, gave them wagons as Pharaoh had commanded, and gave them provisions for the journey, and gave each of the brothers changes of clothes. Note that. But he gave Benjamin 300 pieces of silver. Note that. 5 changes of clothes. Note that. And he sent his father 10 donkeys carrying the best products of Egypt, female donkeys carrying grain, food, provisions for the journey. So Joseph sent the brothers on the way, and he said to them, by the way, don't argue. I know you guys. Just go. Just go. And they had sold Joseph because of a long-colored robe that his dad had given him, and they hated him for it. And after 20 years of grief, they're standing before Joseph with torn clothes. And in return, Joseph, he clothes them. He gives them royal robes to wear home. And he takes his younger brother and he gives him 5 royal robes. And the other brothers aren't angry and they're not jealous this time. They finally get it. They finally have experienced grace and mercy. They didn't get what they received. They were blessed. And so finally they go from Egypt and they go to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan. And in verse 26, it's really the climactic point of this story. They say to their father, your son Joseph is alive. He's ruler over Egypt. And Jacob was stunned. He didn't believe them. Of course, his sons were liars. Why would he believe them? But they pleaded with him, and they told him everything that Joseph had said. And when he saw the wagons and that Joseph had sent to transport him, Moses records that the spirit of their father Jacob revived. His grief was bringing him down to the grave, and now he had life again. And I love this statement. Jacob, he doesn't care about all the riches that had been given to him. He says, enough. My son Joseph is still alive, and I will go see him before I die. The message was, your son was dead. At least that's what everyone thought. But now he's alive. And like Isaac in Genesis 22, the Joseph story reveals to us a type of resurrection. And now it's the father's one great desire, his son having died. Now he's alive to see him in all of his glory. I love that. You see, so with Joseph, so too with Jesus. And Jesus is just a better Joseph. Do you see it now? Jesus was sent into the slave market of sin to be our substitute. He suffers for us. Like Joseph, Jesus perfects himself through his suffering. And like Joseph, Jesus was rejected by his brothers only to redeem his brothers. And like Joseph, it is the great desire of the Heavenly Father to be with him and to reveal his glory. And the Heavenly Father of Jesus witnessed his death on a cross, but Christ arose from the dead to the glory of the Father, and the Father's Son, having been brought back to life, now reigns and rules at his right hand in heaven, and one day we will see his resurrected glory. And like Joseph's brothers, one day Jesus will give us some new clothes in heaven. The book of Revelation talks about the white robes that we will wear there. But more importantly, we will be clothed with the righteousness of Christ. Revelation 7, John in his vision of the revealing says, after this I looked, and there was a vast multitude from every nation, tribe, people, language, so great couldn't be numbered, all standing before the throne and before the Lamb. And they were clothed in white robes with palm branches in their hands, and they cried out in a loud voice, salvation belongs to our God, who is seated on his throne, and to the Lamb. You don't have to focus on those who've offended you. That's a waste of life. To live with anger, with bitterness, to live with regret. That's not why Christ went to the cross for you. Christ redeemed you by becoming a curse so that you would be freed from the curse and the stain and the guilt of sin. Now he offers you to live redeemed. He offers you to live a life that focuses more on how much you have been forgiven than how much you have been offended. To be Christian is to be forgiving and to bury the sins of those who have sinned against you, and to take your sin to the cross and bury it there so that you might be clothed with the righteousness of Christ. Friends, one day we will be in heaven and see the Son in all his glory. That was Jacob's great desire. I want to see the glory of my son. And that was the Heavenly Father's great desire. To have his son return to heaven in all his glory. And one day we'll be there with him, clothed in white robes, clothed with his righteousness, that we might forever and ever declare our God and the Lamb, salvation belongs to them. Now that's a message to share with people who are struggling. Amen? Let's share it. Father, thank you for your redeeming grace. Thank you for your love. Thank you that you loved us more than you wanted to punish us. Thank you that your Son, our Savior, was willing to pay the price and the penalty of our sin. And thank you that he was strong enough and perfect enough to do so. And now, Father, even now, help us to put away bitterness, regret, anger, hostility towards everyone. Let us find ourselves there at the cross being forgiven, and help us to forgive others. May the grace that we have received be the grace that we give away freely. And may we tell others who are struggling how incredible the redeeming grace of God is. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.